Welcome. Welcome to DiversiTV Season 2, Episode 4, The Asian Perspective. My name is Mark Harris, and I'll introduce our guests shortly. Can we go to slide? DiversiTV's mission is to illuminate everyday diversity issues as defined at Lane Community College and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And hopefully we'll talk about issues that you don't necessarily get at your standard diversity training, even if you do go to those kind of things. Just to recap where we've been and to show where we're going, October 3rd, we started out with a Native perspective with Gifford Talmadge, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. The next month, the Anglo perspective with Patsy Remie from the Women's Program and Workforce Development here at the college. October 17th, last week, Africans in America with Danella Elizabeth Alston from, basically a longtime community member in the African American community. The week after that was the Latino perspective with Judith Castro. This week we have our guest, Remie Calalang. Next week, we'll have someone representing the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning two-spirit community. November 14th, disability. 21st, youth and class, November 28th, a couple weeks after Thanksgiving. And ending this season, spirituality and religion, and I was trying to angle outside of the usual Abrahamic religions and look at Native American perspective, which often gets left out of the religious equation. Our guest tonight is Remie Calalang, who's a Bethal School District Multicultural Coordinator. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark.
How did you come to live in Eugene, and why did you choose to live here?
That is a common question, I think, and I'm never sure.
You're not from here, are you?
No. I don't meet actually very many people who are from here, which is,
yes.
It's always surprising to find actually someone who is born and raised or spent most of their life here in Eugene.
Or whose family came in on the wagon trains four generations ago.
Yeah. I think I maybe know one person who fit that one. I was born in the Philippines, and my parents then came into the U.S. through Canada when I was 2. So I was lived in New York primarily, upstate New York. And then, just a roll of the dice, had spent most of my life on the East Coast. Looked at all graduate schools on the West Coast and ended up in Seattle, Washington.
At UW.
University of Washington, and loved Seattle, except for the fact that it was just really big and very crowded and lots of traffic. And, with all that water there, it just made it even worse because there are really 2 roads going this way, 3 roads going that way, and just jammed. So at the time, I had a partner, and she was very familiar with Eugene, had gone to the University of Oregon, and so we had traveled that I-5 connection between Seattle and Eugene, and, I liked it. It's a nice pace. It's got some urban qualities, mostly just it's green, and since I had a son, it was a nice place to raise a kid, and it's very lesbian friendly. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say very. It was lesbian friendly.
Why do you think that is? I've heard lots of speculation from other lesbian friends who said, Eugene is more lesbian friendly because blah, 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 as compared to.
I think part of it is there's, my sense is it's that there's some hippie roots in Eugene, and I think that kind of, I hate to generalize and stereotype, but that sort of earthy, crunchy,
Birkenstock granola.
Birkenstock. I mean, it really is the stereotype.
Yeah.
And a lot of lesbians, I shouldn't say a lot, some lesbians fit that.
Yeah.
And I think that it's I think how community was built around here. You got a few folks in here, and they seems like a tolerant place, seems like a comfortable place, and then more come, and so so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of how that community was raised. I mean, I don't know a lot of gay men in this area. You know, I know more who are from Portland or Seattle, but, you know, not so much from Eugene. Although, you know, there are some. Yeah. But there tends to be more lesbian populated in terms of the queer community here.
Yeah. I think the way I heard it explained is that the standard of living was less expensive, say, than in San Francisco. So that,
absolutely.
You know, women tend, in whatever they're employed, tend to be still structurally tend to be paid less. So it's easier to live here, and that's what attracts people,
absolutely.
among other things.
Absolutely. So. Well, and that's, I mean, that's one of the main reasons why we moved from Seattle to here was because to live in Seattle, I mean, both of us would probably have had to work full time, you know, just because the cost of living was that much higher. And coming down here, I really was able to work part-time for most of Eli's early years, and really just went full-time last year. So, and he's now 8. So I was very fortunate. Flies. I know, and he's almost as tall as I am. So dangerous. It is. Assistant coach and everything. I know. He could talk now. So when we first met was actually you were applying for a job here at the college. At LCC, yeah. For a diversity coordinator. You were, I recall you were a very close second. And one of your evident strengths was one of the projects which I actually, since I Googled your name because I was trying to find some info, you know, for the marquee. Right. So I Excel that website. Could you explain that? Because that was, shall we say, a rarefied diversity application. That whole project where you're trying to basically make an engineering school friendly to people of color, attract students of color. There was all kinds of interesting recruiting pieces with the university, with that department. Can you talk about that some? It was a great project to be involved in. While I was at the University of Washington, I was in the College of Education. And EXCEL, which is ECSEL, was Engineering Coalition of Schools for Excellence in Education and Leadership. It's a long word. It was a National Science Foundation grant-funded project among 7 or 8 universities across the nation. And it really connected. It was, you know, MIT was one, University of Washington was one, Penn State was another, and then there were a couple of historically black colleges as well. Howard University was the primary one involved with that. And the whole purpose of this coalition was to look at engineering programs, especially at those schools, but in general, and to think about them and how to revise the programs and how to make them more attractive to attract minority students into engineering. And not just engineering, but also science or math. Because, you know, this was, you know, 15, 17 years ago. And these schools recognized, one, minority students in high school weren't graduating at the same rate as their white peers. 2, the engineering schools were very white. And then 3, in general, these students, even if they were graduating, minority students who were graduating, were not choosing to go to a 4-year school or choosing to go into math or science. So there were lots of pieces involved in this. And one project that I worked on was with the design class. And it was a combination of bringing in education, theories of education into design and into engineering. And what folks realized through this project, through Excel and through some of the research that was happening, was that there are lots of natural inclinations among minority students, like kinesthetic, hands-on projects. These things that were seemed very natural. A good fit for engineering. Exactly, for engineering, but problem also solving and and group work, which tended to be more attractive to minority students in high school programs. And or in middle school programs. Like, to just give kids math problems or science projects on, on paper wasn't enough to make it pop,
right,
really, for them.
Right, because unless you have very good visualization skills,
exactly.
It's not going to leap off the page.
Exactly.
Right.
But so one thing that I would do is, I worked closely with some of the community centers in Seattle, like South Seattle Community Center.
Okay.
It's not too far from Garfield High School.
Right.
In South Eugene,
Yeah.
not South Eugene, South Seattle.
Yeah.
And what we would do is we'd take something very simple, like wind-up toys, metal wind-up toys, and with some screwdrivers and small pliers, and any age range. We'd pair up elementary kids with high school kids, or just work primarily with middle school kids, and say, okay, let's think about these wind-up toys as a design project or as an engineering problem.
Okay.
And so what they would call is like, so I ask the students, think about what's inside of it. Maybe draw some pictures so that, here's an opportunity for them to demonstrate problem-solving skills, intuition, just brainstorming in multiple ways, not just in words, not just on a test, but, draw the picture. Here's how you label, here's how you, do this, and then they would know the ideas, they would know what a lever is. They may not know what type of lever, they may not even know it's a lever, but they would know, well, if I bet this is what's happening inside this wind-up toy. If you press this, so
right.
cause.
To activate it.
Exactly.
And the spring
exactly.
provides the motive power.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then the students were like, okay, now let's take it apart. And so they would take it apart and they'd have to, piece by piece. And it was very impressive to see how engaged these students are when some of the things that we would hear from teachers was that these kids couldn't learn, or these students can't sit still long enough
right.
to do a project like this,
right.
or these, and some of these educators were amazed at what these students could do. These students that they sort of had in their heads, they had sort of made up their minds about these kinds of students, because they were primarily African American students. A lot of Pacific Islander Asian students.
Mm-hmm. Several different flavors
exactly.
of Tongan, Samoans.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Some of them, first generation here, fresh to the country, and others, had some family ties, but still some very strong cultural and traditional ties to their families and their culture. So, it was just neat to see that and to learn, not to learn, but to help these teachers in the Seattle Public Schools see these students differently.
Yeah. And
so the other piece to our project was not just working directly with students, but was also working with Seattle Public School teachers through workshops. We sent a group out to MIT for a month to work on some projects and to bring those ideas back into Seattle Public Schools. So it was a great project. It was fun. I still try to think about how to incorporate those activities into
what you're doing now. So how? So we didn't hire you.
No, which is fine. I did like the person you did hire, so.
We did too, but not to take anything away from that person. My hit, and I had stated this. I said, okay, she's where the college needs to be, right. But it's not, and he's where the college is at now, right? And possibly could move it, but the calculus about who you place where to be a change agent and whether they'll be accepted or not is an interesting one.
Yes.
So you're now in another position.
Yes.
In the community. What are your duties there? What do you do there?
They have shifted quite a bit over the years.
The moving job description.
It absolutely is, which has kept it fresh and lively for me, which I love. And I have to say that I have incredible support from the superintendent and the assistant superintendent and from staff and from, other district administrators. So that has made it a very good experience for me so far. I don't know what the future holds, but for the most part, it's been fantastic. And so I do a variety of jobs. One is really thinking about the policies that we have and what the impact of some policies or possible policy changes will have on the school district or for students or families in our district primarily. I mean, it really is about, well, you know, one thing that we've talked about, you know, we've sort of been a little bit ahead of other districts when we've looked at our harassment and bullying policy, and we were one of the first districts.
I've observed that.
One of the first districts in Oregon to have started to have the conversation and to include cyberbullying into our harassment policies.
All right.
You know,
right.
And that's something that the students were way ahead of most of us.
They
and I say
are.
us in terms of
the
our
adults,
staff,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
Because of what was happening, you know, their ability to communicate in the various ways they communicate. And, you know, that's can be a very positive thing, but clearly we've seen there's a pattern of, well, it's not so positive. You know, it could be a really cruel form of communication.
Yeah, especially, you know, not to stereotype middle schoolers, but I mean,
well,
with the universal, you know, cell phones, texting, you know, there's the whole evidence thing.
Yes.
Do they really mean what they said? You know?
Oh, well, you know, I mean, and they're so good at it. I mean, students really are so adept at it. I mean, we had an incident in one of our schools where something happened. It was dealt with effectively, we thought, at the school. That evening, or by the next day, on MySpace, I believe, there was a stick figure cartoon version of what happened at the school. Like I think there was a fight, and it wasn't necessarily harassment or bullying at the level with the fight, because it was just really a physical altercation or a couple of kids shoving each other's.
Yeah.
But then when it moved into MySpace, and then there was sort of this cartoon portrayal, and with text and naming, you know, oh, I did this to the student, and like you could watch it over and over and over again. And that student who was depicted in there as the weak stick figure, the weaker, I should say, you know, really had some hard feelings about it. And, you know, and we right that piece as, well, that was harassment.
Well, sure.
You cannot put that stuff out there in there, you know, and they say, well, it was just a stick figure. No, you know, so that's what our cyberbullying.
Well, it's just a noose. It's just a piece of rope hanging
exactly.
from a tree. You know what?
I know. Given the context.
Yeah. Okay.
Given the intent, and you know all those pieces. So that's one example of how thinking about policy and implications. And then we've also started the conversation about gender identity and what to do about that. And you know, that's a little bit more challenging because I know that within our community, broad community, not just in the Bethel community, but broadly, this idea of gender expression or gender queer or gender curious or gender anything, that there is such a thing as gender identity.
Right, there is.
You know,
and so you know,
it's very difficult for some people to wrap their heads around.
Well, right, because for example, I mean, I deal with this in my addictions classes, right? Because we're talking about, you know, moving from where we were just talking about. It's like, okay, the internet was developed to share weapon systems technology. So what that means, since that's where it started, and it becomes a consumer item, it still retains some of the original conceptual DNA. You can use it as a weapon. Oh, yeah, you can market, you can buy things, sure, you can shop online, but with MySpace, with texting, you can use it as a weapon. You can design stuff and use it to harass people and, you know, hate on the web and all that kind of stuff. So now, for example, we talk about middle school, right, sex education, the plumbing lecture where we're marching boys and girls to see,
and they're separated,
separate videos, you know, of the plumbing lecture, which is heterosexual oriented, right? Rather than having a larger, and that's where we're at. And then the schools are doing that, and so theoretically, the parents are supposed to be doing, you know, the sex education, doing the talk, but they're not, right? So it's been up to the school system, which isn't structured to do social service or any of that kind of stuff. So yeah, we're allowed to do safe touch things for prevention of child abuse because we're all mandatory reporters in elementary school, but it's still a pretty oblique
Oh, yes.
conversation.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So then when we get, so in my classes where, to introduce the concept, and this is one of the things that when we'll talk about Crash, because you and I developed that in response to, a RFP, where we're talking about, the intersexed, right? Because let's try and, broaden your thinking, okay?
Yeah.
The DNA code is having 4% of human births be intersex. So let's look at it as a continuum. Yeah. Let's look at, right? Oh, on one end of the continuum, it's rare, but one end of the continuum, 2 fully functioning sets of visible external genitalia.
Yeah.
Okay, 2, the other, where you have one where they look like a girl or they look like a boy, but they have same-sex feelings based on what their genome is telling them.
Exactly.
And that's the DNA code.
Yeah.
So unless you're going to say the devil's controlling the DNA code.
Which some do.
Some do, right? Or they won't even cop to evolution. But, okay, I have degrees in psychology. I'm an alcohol and drug counselor. I deal with the science and the neuroscience. And so, okay, the DNA is putting out 4 million births a year. Spread that population out over time. And how many people do you have? Quite a few. So,
absolutely. And it's worth having a conversation about, because even if it's just a small population, those are the folks that we need to support. Those are the folks that we need to provide services, training for understanding, and for the most part, it's been interesting because we've had a couple of students go through or spend some time in our district, not having gone through the whole system, but spent some time in our district, and they have identified as transgender themselves. The students have one high school, one middle school.
Okay.
And the students, for the most part, dealt with it like, okay, this person wants to call themselves S or X or, whatever, and fine. It had more to do with, I think, some of the adults around being like, well,
where do you go to the bathroom?
Yeah, what do we do? How do we do this? What do we do? And when we had the conversation in our district about gender identity, that issue was raised, and physical building stuff, it could be a challenge for some of our older buildings, but for the most part, some of our newer buildings, there's usually what we, they call
room.
Exactly. Exactly. There's usually one room or one bathroom that, there are ways to accommodate this.
There are.
There are ways, and I don't want to liken it to disabilities, because it's not. It's not a disability at all. But there are some very, not unfortunately, but there are some very clear laws that related to disability. It's one of the most regulated sort of statuses out there in terms of the laws and what schools have to do, what buildings have to do, in terms of building code and accommodations. And yet for some of these other statuses, there just isn't. There aren't a lot of laws, like, protection for gays and lesbians. Not a lot in terms of the federal law, so a lot of the states kind of have to create this. And
then there's some mixed stuff, like, NPR today, the Barney Frank thing. So Barney Frank pulling transgender out of this protection bill. It's a little too early. A gay man is saying, well, in 72 we could do this. We had to fight to have that conversation, and now in 07, they're still not ready. Well, okay, whatever. Who's not ready?
I know, and the thing is, and for me, and when it comes to policies, it's districts, for better or for worse, are probably more reactive than they are proactive.
Yes.
And so when you have federal bodies or when you have state bodies not willing to take this on, it's easy enough for other organizations, public agencies,
to be squeamish too.
Exactly, and be like, well, if they're not willing to make the step, we're not going to make the step. And for me, sometimes when I think about the landscape and I think about gay lesbian issues or queer issues, and then there's the gender issue, and for the most part, the homophobia piece that's fairly well covered. We've got most of our, you know, like I feel like staff know how to react to that.
Yeah.
They know how to work with it. They've, you know, have some language around to deal with it. But, you know, gender identity, for me, and with my thinking about where schools are, and not just schools, but districts, public agencies, broadly, I think that, you know, the gender identity piece is really that next sort of frontier in some of the civil rights work.
So,
What that has to do with the age perspective, I'm not sure, but...
Well, that's good. I was going to go there.
I feel like we're in my living room.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you feel that comfortable because, having the counselor hat on, it's like, okay, you just outed yourself on TV like you've done this a lot. You know? And it ain't a trip to you, right?
Not really, no. And I think part of it has been, you know, when I applied for the position at the school district, and not everybody, but people who I had talked to about applying for the job were sort of counseling me against
outing yourself,
claiming my lesbian status, and you know, or talking about my family structure. And then I just realized why. I mean, I walk in, they're going to see that I'm Asian American. Is that going to be any different than me being a lesbian? In terms, you know, but it's just a less visible piece unless you look at, you know, or if you hear me talk about my family, or if you heard, you know, talk about how Eli was, you know, brought into this world, all those things. Right. So, you know, so it's not, to me, I just felt like, yeah, might as well. And for the most part, nothing. I mean, really, you know, haven't felt any backlash at all with respect to that. You know, then again, I'm also, you know, 1 or 2 levels removed from students, and so I'm not exactly sure what that experience would be like if I had a lot more direct contact with students, because I'm mostly at the district office.
And that means policy, and that means staff and
community.
But
I work most of that. But then at the same time, you know, I do work with some students, and we do talk about diversity issues, and most of the time when I'm working with students, they're willing to say, like, you know, we talk about race and ethnicity pretty easily, and then we, you know, kind of will talk about other pieces, and it's nothing to students, you know, and that's it. I mean, you know, we were just having the PFLAG fundraiser this last weekend, and our district always buys tickets. Well, I shouldn't say always. In the past few years, has bought tickets for this event, and we bring students and staff, and, you know, our superintendent and our assistant superintendent and other staff have attended this event as well, which is a great show of support.
Well, that's good for Colt and Tim. Do the other districts follow suit? Nancy, George, what?
Haven't seen anybody. I talked to this the GSA, one of the GSA advisors from Springfield, and I asked her if their district paid for the tickets, and they got sponsorship through PFLAG to attend the event, so their district actually didn't buy tickets. I know the city of Eugene buys tickets for some of their staff as well, but I think that PFLAG, for the most part, when we're thinking about students, has a direct impact for gay, lesbian, straight ally, queer, questioning students, because they're the groups that they run and the support they provide in terms of the gay-straight alliances at the high schools. And when we've had issues and I've needed some resources, PFLAG has always been there and been more than willing to share what they have and to provide training if necessary.
For those of you who don't know the acronym, PFLAG is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays.
Yes, yes. Where was I going with this? So we were talking about, so in terms of students, you know, like, it's the fact that most of the high schools in our area have gay-straight alliances, you know, to support.
Which is definitely a sea change from when I first came here 25 years ago.
And then when I talk to the students in our high school about their experiences, they are just positive for the most part. I mean, like, you know, I always want to know, are there issues, you know, like, what's really going on? They're like, no, we've got a great group. We're really supportive. Signs go up. Nobody tears them down. I mean, those are some really tangible gains in this area. So it's you know, it's, so for students, I think that piece is changing. You know, I think that that sort of the society in general. It's more on TV. Kids are used to it. There's, you know, even just some of the, you know, I look at like the advertising for Abercrombie and Fitch, or I look at the advertising and I'm just sort of like, is that homoeroticism or is that just me? You know, and they're you know, topless young men who just hanging out, lounging around each other, you know, and I just sort of see that, and, you know, or, you know, pink seems to be back in flavor. You know, so it's just funny, you know, and not to say that everything's perfect or we've made fantastic gains, but it's there. You know, I can see that and I can feel it.
Okay.
You know, and especially when I talk to the students.
All right.
So.
What kind of conversation did your Filipina background, culture, have around this issue?
Well, you know, first of all, it wasn't a conversation because we never, within my family at least, it was never talked about. And we, you know, it's funny because we used to play games, like, is it Mother May I? Where you had to walk, you could take 3 steps and 3 giant steps. And one of them that we had learned, and I don't know how we learned this, was you could take 3 steps, but you have to walk like a buckla, which I think was a derogatory term, I believe. You know, I don't actually know for certain, but I remember that it entailed walking with a limp hand and kind of sashaying, and it was very homophobic. You know, very stereotypical.
Stereotypical gay male.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But there's no, let's see, to African Americanize, you know, there's no Filipina term for bulldagger or
not that I'm aware of.
Fembutch,
you know?
No term like that.
No. You know, and we're talking about a country that was primarily Catholic.
Yeah.
And still is primarily Catholic.
But the indigenous folks, before the Spanish came over, would have had some construct for that.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. But most of that, because it was such an oral-based culture, or cultures, I should say, there just isn't a lot written down or explored among those indigenous cultures. Not as much. I think it's still kind of coming. And you know, it's, you know, my sense has always been that the Philippines has not been a hotbed of research for most folks. So, you know, actually going in and trying to figure that out, you know, I have some really old texts that I've picked up over the years about the Philippines, and just the number of fallacies within them, you know, cannibalism, and, you know, we're talking even texts that were written in the 1970s, 1980s, just really overgeneralized, overstated, just and seemed more about sensationalizing this kind of the 7,000 tropical islands and, you know, this and that. But it's, you know, it's not. And so that, there's that piece. And then, so it's primarily Catholic country. And so we never talked about it. Never talked about it. Never really, you know, my parents, for all I knew, didn't have friends or family that would have identified as queer.
And you never met no cousins, nothing like that. Okay.
So, you know, so the conversation with me was not so much about when I first started thinking about it in 7th grade, and, you know, if my mom ever sees this, she'll be shocked that I actually had this thought.
You can show her the tape, but I mean, yeah.
That it, you know, I first had this thought in 7th grade, you know, but I didn't know where to turn, so I looked in the encyclopedia and the dictionary. We had both of those in our house.
Naturally.
So I looked it up there, and I was just like, oh, no. I don't think that's going to...
And the word was?
I looked up lesbian, because I think I knew that, and then homosexual, because I knew those two. And then, but gay, too, I think. But I think I might have looked up mostly homosexual, and then from there, I think I found the words lesbian and gay. So. I don't even think I may have known lesbian. I think I knew lesbo. I think I had heard that in school. And then from there...
As a pejorative, probably.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. So, So really, so my conversation wasn't so much. It was a conversation of, I don't think this exists in my home or in my realm of possibilities.
You would tend to get that especially if there's no equivalent term in Tagalog or whichever language you know.
And if anything, it was
yeah.
very negative. There
Yeah.
were some very strong negative associations.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and most of the language within our family it was so heteronormative.
Yeah.
I mean, just, you know, every time we visited aunts and uncles, oh, you're developing. Oh, you're what a pretty young woman. Oh, who's your boyfriend? When are you going to get married? I mean, it was just.
Well, at least they have a grandson. I mean,
I know, right. Right. You know, just very overtly heterosexual, which I don't think was very different for anybody else. But
probably not.
My sense is that, you know, for most of them, it just wasn't a possibility for anybody to be gay in our family.
Right.
You know, which is funny to me that it didn't occur to them about me, because I was always a very strong individual, very, very good athlete. So very tomboy. I would rather play with my brothers and my dad than my sister or my mom.
All right. So since we're throwing out terms so trippingly, normally, you know, heteronormative, that was great. Intersectionality.
Yes.
Break it down for us.
You know, who isn't somewhere? I mean, just think.
Yes. Okay. Who isn't? But you represent, well, don't we all? Who isn't?
Right.
As you pointed out. Okay. So right off the bat, all right. Tomboy, right? Mom. Asian, then model minority, science and math literate, you know, probably excellent student, et cetera, you know, lesbian, yada, yada, yada. Lots of intersections,
pieces.
lots of pieces in there, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I want to introduce the whole crash concept since, you know, we had come up with that.
Yeah.
So in a second, guys, I'll have you go to slide, if you would. All right, so we've been working on this a little bit. Where this came from, CRASH, so that acronym at the top of the screen, classism, racism, addiction was the original thing that we were tasked to look at, but we also looked at in terms of intersections. Ability, age, sexism, and heterosexism. So interlocking systems of oppression.
Yes.
Right? So before we came up with this before the movies, and basically it was originally in response, we were responding to a request for proposal to develop a training working with caseworkers who were working with the most difficult welfare population. This was in late Clinton. So it was basically talking about welfare reform or welfare deform, as Julianne Malveaux calls it, right? So addicted women of color. And so the request for proposal, the RFP, was from the Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse out of Columbia, Annie Casey Foundation, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, Robert Wood Johnson, and basically the pooled money was designed a training component dealing with those 5 issues for multiple sites. So about 20 different things, and basically about $250,000 grant or something like that. And so, you know, we put together this proposal. We, you know, were invited, and then they told us we had to pay for it ourselves to get out there. Like, wait a minute. Yeah. No, we're not doing that on spec for a white organization. Sorry. You'd pay white people to come out there.
About that.
You can pay us if you're dealing with $250,000. We're talking about a $500 plane ticket in your Columbia University.
Yeah.
Lane Community College pays $500 to interview for a job. Yeah. So, no. So I was looking out for whether they still stole the idea. But the idea is, I mean, because the level that we've been talking about is fairly sophisticated, and even though we're diversity trainers and, you know, our peers at the top of the game know what we're talking about, but a lot of lay people don't. Hence, DiversiTV, right? So to break it down, go to slide again. Systems of privilege exist.
Yes.
Right? That's what the training was basically to illumine. So whether or not you or your ancestors did the historical oppression which originally set up the system, you benefit from it by virtue of your characteristics that you get. So for example, an able-bodied, wealthy, conservative white male drug addict alcoholic commits a felony. Now, when you get a prescription, you get prescription drugs, okay? You can get a maximum of 3 months supply, okay? This particular person, because this made the news, had 3 years, okay? So that's a federal offense, felony, okay? So we're talking Rush Limbaugh, all right? 3 years worth of OxyContin and guts, no jail time at all. Maybe probation, maybe, right? Recent news item, working class or middle class white male drug addict in a wheelchair does the same thing Rush Limbaugh does, right? 3 years of OxyContin, same offense, gets 5+ years in prison. Now, is that different lawyers? Is it money? Is it what? How does Rush Limbaugh get off scot-free because he's a friend of the president? Or no, federal crime is federal crime, right? So our piece, looking at Crash, is saying, okay, let's look at how those interlocking systems exist. So, for example, when addiction gets treated like a medical problem or lapse in judgment, who gets criminalized, who gets treated like a recidivist cultural career criminal if they're a person of color. So there are some in the local criminal justice system, especially juvenile system, who actually equated ethnicity with a criminal culture. Right. I mean, literally have said that, continue to say that. Right?
Well, we just have to look at Springfield and some of their gang.
Oh, right. You know, I sat on the gang task force for Lane when that was happening in the middle, and then, oh, well, white wannabes, and they called them wannabes, you know, in what they used to call black-style gangs. Oh, no, it's not black-style. You can't call it black-style if the 80% of the kids are white. Oh, L.A. style, like that's different. Yeah, I mean, we have to laugh because it's like the irony is it's amazing.
True. It's true.
So, you know, basically, you know, go to slide again. So white people get treatment, people of color get jail or treatment in jail if they get treatment. And so when we look at what we called universal practices for dealing with those, some of these are concepts. So we've talked about, for example, within racism, even though that's not in here, the second one down, skin privilege. So the construct of model minority as a, you know, Asians, right?
Yes.
Oh, they're smart in math, they're, you know, they succeed in the system as good or as better as whites. They never complain about racism. That's why they're the model.
Yes.
Right? And so here you were in this, you know, here in this position.
And in fact, I mean, what's interesting, because when we say Asian,
right?
I mean, what group are we talking about? Because if you look at it statistically for the U.S., I am not the model minority because I'm Filipina. And most Filipinos or Filipinas in the U.S. do not graduate from high school. It's one of the lowest graduation rates among any group when you break it down like that. And then also to think about, you know, just that model minority status. It's just, again, it's looking at it not in terms of the intersectionality of it, but just, well, there's that one point. And we'll just focus on that one point. Right. And not think about what else is going on or what else may be happening for that person. So it's always just this whole idea of model minority. You know, and you know, when you talk among, like, you know, I was at Lane Community College's Rites of Passage program for the Pan-Asian group. Okay. And we talked about that with the students. And the Pan-Asian group, you know, had just brought together students from all over Eugene, Springfield, and even Corvallis, all Asian American students, got them all together to kind of talk about some issues that are specific to being Asian American in the U.S., and for some of these students, even more specifically in Eugene, in Springfield area. You know, and we dissected this idea. Well, what do you know, when we threw out to the students, what do you think about the model minority idea? And the students just sort of, they laughed. They laughed because I said, like I said, that was something, when I was a high school student 20 years ago, people would say, oh, this must be so easy for you. And I asked the students, do you still get that? And they said, yeah, they do. When in fact, some of these students, are struggling because
Right.
they haven't been able to find a community. Their families are removed from larger family networks, so they're a little more isolated, and just all these issues. But all we educators, lots of educators want to see is, well, it's an Asian American student.
Yeah. They're not going to be any problem.
They'll be fine. Yes, they're good at school. They get lots of support at home. Their families are really involved. Their families are strict. All these things, which may be true for some students, but not all.
Yeah.
Not all.
Yeah.
And it's unfair to the students. It's really unfair, or to anybody, to sort of think of them in those ways. So, but and I think sometimes somebody not accused me, but suggested that one of the reasons why I can be successful in my position as a diversity worker is because I'm Asian American, and I'm less threatening than somebody who's African American or somebody who is some other ethnic group, and it's an interesting idea of how to sort of use my position or the majority's perception of me to kind of help. Okay, yeah, if you're going to let me in because you think I'm going to be quiet, that's fine. I may not be quiet, but if you're going to let me in and it's going to open a door, that works.
Yeah, right.
That works.
Right. So you can be sort of a stealth activist.
Exactly.
Because they're not looking for it.
Exactly.
Right, as they would be. Or they could hear it. It is an interesting calculus.
Yes.
With how that plays in or doesn't.
Yes.
Certainly another one of our colleagues at the city, contrasting with his predecessor.
Yes.
Is basically finding an easier time of it because of that same thing. But
absolutely.
They don't know him.
Exactly. Exactly. But then, sometimes the backlash is a little bit different when I do speak up or I do challenge something, and people, whoa, what do you mean? Why are you saying that? And I've gotten the feedback from other people. It's like, well, I think what you said or how you said it was unexpected.
Right.
And I'm always like,
like you were direct.
Yes.
Instead of inscrutable.
Instead of saying, well, I think maybe you, and so it's just, I have that awareness.
Yes.
I do have that awareness. And I think that what I try to help students, especially Asian American students or minority students, is to sort of recognize and have that awareness of themselves and within society or within the U.S. or within a school, just to have that awareness, because, if I'll meet with a student and I'll talk to the student in front of the family or with staff involved, it would be a very different conversation than if I'm just having a one-on-one conversation with that student.
Right.
Because that one-on-one will probably be a little bit more like, all right, let's just break it down because this is what it's really like. What's really going on, and this is
on the real tip.
Exactly. And for a lot of students, having the opportunity to have that kind of conversation it's helpful.
Right.
It's really helpful. And so I think that's for the rites of passage students, the Asian American students, it was the first time that they were in a group of 10, 15 other Asian Americans in one room that they weren't all related to.
Right.
To have this kind of conversation about what does racism look like for them? How does it feel? It's funny because we're talking about it. We're like, okay, give us some examples, And one example I've had, and I said, I don't understand why people will say words to me in Japanese. They'll start saying, and I remember this one time I turned around and just said, I'm not even Japanese, you moron.
Right.
And the person got really
Have you heard my last name?
Yes.
So is that Japanese? Or
No.
Come on.
No. And so, the other kids talk about, they're like, yeah, I don't understand why they call me Chink. I'm not even Chinese. My eyes aren't, you know what I mean? We're like,
Yeah.
and we just kind of go, you know, and it was fun. We made it fun for us in this small, safe group,
Right.
you know, because we could laugh about it. Whereas I don't doubt that when we hear it or when these students hear it, I mean, it hurts. You know, it's like, oh, what are they saying? What are they seeing when they see me? What are they, you know? And that's, I think, that idea of the intersections of our identities is helpful for when we deal with these students, because we're not just looking at them as like, well, if you're this, if physically you look like this, therefore this is what it is. This is what your life must be like. This must be the sum of your experiences.
Right. You know, as like cultural competency is an extended laundry list of kindler, gentler stereotypes.
Yes.
So that I don't make the obvious dumb mistakes.
Yes. You know.
But no, it's also learning about, oh, what is my experience in that's particular to me, not as part of the group, but the other side of that.
Yeah, like I took a class called Teaching the Black Inner City Child. And I was just like, wow. There is a course that I could take, and I will be equipped to teach the Black inner city child. That's interesting to me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And you get a certificate. And
at the very end.
You have your cultural competency card.
Yes. And I think that there are some educators, and for those of us, you know, that in the professional world, it would be so easy to be like, please, just give me that list. Just give me that checkoff thing that I can just be in this, or the information sheet or the cheat sheet on how to teach to reach out to this child and how to reach it. You know, and this idea of universal practices, you know, it's like, oh, there's some basic things that you need to approach all people.
And I think the idea that, you know, we were going with and will go for, you know, as we go for this is, we have a more extended laundry list, but no, this is more like, and just to make the analogy, putting gloves on when and assuming that everybody's infected with AIDS when you touch, you know,
or
bloodborne
any kind of
right,
infectious
or anything.
Disease.
Yeah, you're going into a possibly or a toxic environment. Here's some basic things that you do that you can work with skill that will protect you. And so it's not just about learning the obvious, you know, things not to say. It's trying to look at some of the things that of what to do.
You know, and some of them are just, you know, like, okay, let's start with the basics. Don't make assumptions. Just because you had one Asian American student or one African American student, or you knew somebody who was African American or Asian American or Latino or whatever, let's not assume that that person somehow is representative of the entire group.
Right.
You know, and it's just so interesting when I hear people in training say, well, I heard, and you know, and I'm like, or, you know, like, or Ruby Payne's, you know, work on generational poverty. You know, this idea that, this is what it looks like in this realm, and this is what it looks like in this other realm, and, you know, or this is what it looks like in general. And I'm always like, you know, I'm thinking there are probably some really obvious class or racial or ethnic differences in how that generational poverty is experienced.
Right.
You know, or regional differences. You know, there's a in the Philippines, you know, talking to my mom about some of those experiences. Like, you know, if you were poor, you're poor, and, you know, and there were things that that in terms of jobs that you had access to, but there were lots of resources around. You could always fish.
Yes.
You could always pull up some of the vegetation that was around you, you know. And it's just so, you know, I hear lots of stories about people who coming from those countries. Like, I've heard of people who are from the Philippines coming in and looking in the woods around their apartment complexes for food, because that's what they did in the Philippines.
That's what they did, right. Survival skills that are common knowledge.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So, you know, they may have been poor, they may have been poverty, had, you know, impoverished, but they had some skills that they brought over from the Philippines to deal with it, you know. And that's something that I think that in terms of, you know, thinking about generational poverty, that'd be nice to sort of have that, again, bringing that intersectionality into it. But, well, that's their experiences, and what would be another, you know, experience of poverty for folks.
And a way out, because
exactly.
I mean, that's when we talk about, you know, when people say, oh, you're so articulate. You don't speak with an accent. Well, no, I can turn my accent on or off at will and appear to be more educated. Well, probably not more educated than I am, but possibly.
Right.
As a survival skill.
Right.
You know, I can blend in. And no, the Asian immigrant ain't going to eat your cat. Okay? So
absolutely.
Where are you getting at?
Yeah.
So, got anything else? Because we're coming down to like a minute
Well, and
or so.
I think that thinking about the intersectionality in terms of working with students or people is recognizing that those folks, when they have that awareness, will be able to move through the different groups that they may embrace or they may identify as more fluidly if there's some recognition or there's some support outside of themselves.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's that idea of double consciousness or border crossings in terms of identities. So I think that's hopefully where we're, one of the practical pieces of our training can do.
Well, I hope that more institutions like yours and ours will have more people like you so that awareness filters down, at least at the student level. So we'll be coming, if you've liked what you've seen, you can request, we like feedback, and you can email liveclass@lanecc.edu and in the subject line say DiversiTV feedback. I'd like to thank Remie for being with us
Thank you, Mark, for the invitation.
This was killer. Again, another great show. And this is DiversiTV, and we'll see you next week with a brand new show. So thank you for watching, and be well. Go well, stay well.